Right, good morning one and all. Welcome to the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting of Thursday, 20th of January. We are broadcast, we're largely present here. There will be one officer joining for COVID reasons who's working from home, but otherwise everybody's here. As I say, we're being broadcast on the usual link. We'll take apologies first to Mandy.
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Mrs Heath.
Any other apologies we should record? No? Okay, we'll go to item 2, which is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Take that as no. Okay, which brings us to item 3, which is the minutes of 2 meetings that have been held, both on the 6th of January. First of all, there was the call-in meeting. Any comments, amendments necessary on that? No? And then there was the second meeting, also on the 6th of January, which was the LEP scrutiny. Any comments or amendments necessary? Okay, we shall sign those as true record. Item 4 then is the proposed joint coroner service, starting in page 19. And we have Councillor Victoria Wilson and also Janine Cox here to present. I think Trish is also present for this item as well. Who's going to speak first? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Okay, joint coroner's service. So this report has been brought to overview and scrutiny today for your comments and views in advance of the Cabinet meeting on the 16th of February. And it sets out the key points for consideration to create a new joint service for North Staffordshire and Stoke and Staffordshire South coronial jurisdictions. The proposed new joint service would follow national policy established by the Ministry of Justice and supported by the Chief Coroner to merge smaller coronial areas and reduce the overall number of coronial jurisdictions in England and Wales when and if an opportunity to consider this arises. A business case which is required by the Chief Coroner and the MOJ to request the change should the proposal for a new joint service be agreed is appended to this report, and it contains the detail of the proposal. The report sets out the reasons why a joint service is being considered and highlights that this will provide an opportunity to improve services to bereaved families in Staffordshire. It will enable working practices to be streamlined to single simplified processes which will be consistent across the whole of the county. It will also enable opportunities for efficiencies in the future with the consolidation of contractual arrangements. The proposals include combining the back office teams to create a single single coroner's support back office operation. However, a coronial presence will remain in both Stafford and Stoke-on-Trent so that access to local service is maintained. Should the business case be agreed and submitted to the Ministry of Justice, they will consider the request and will prepare the laying of the statutory instrument for the legal process. We're advised that this process is quite lengthy and will take several months as a minimum to complete. A full consultation will take place administered by the MOJ. A brief consultation has already been sent out to key stakeholders. These include Staffordshire Commissioner Ben Adams, Staffordshire Police, Chief Fire Officers, MPs and hospital trusts. Response so far has been limited but positive. The business case and the paper has been co-created by officers at Staffordshire and Stoke City Councils. The democratic process is following a similar timescale in Stoke City Council to that here at Staffordshire County Council. Details contained in the business case explain the proposed governance structure, the financial commitments and proposed back office staff arrangements, and Janine and Trish will now expand on the key areas in the business case and then invite questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, over to you, Janine.
Yeah, so I'm just going to say a few words about the proposed governance and our rationale for that. So on page 29 of your pack and page 7 of the business case, we're proposing that both local authorities enter into a joint agreement which will set out the provision of the service, the accountabilities, responsibilities, monitoring and financial arrangements. Overall governance of the service will then be through a joint executive committee which will include members from both authorities, and they will agree the funding allocations and budgets. They'll authorise expenditure and all other appropriate decision making. The joint committee will be supported by finance and legal officers from both authorities, and there will be an accountable officer within each authority who will have the strategic and operational oversight of the coroner service, and they will provide appropriate advice and reports back into that joint executive committee as appropriate. So whilst the report is proposing a single back office and that Stoke take the lead on the operational management, the strategic decision making which will shape the service going forward will be through this joint arrangement, which ensures a shared accountability and responsibility for the new service.
Thank you. And I'm just going to speak very briefly about the operation of the service and then the financial arrangements. So the business case, as Janine says, proposes a single back office support team. This single structure will align working practices that currently exist between the two teams, and over time it will enable efficiencies to be achieved as well as provide a consistent approach for the relatives of the bereaved throughout Staffordshire. The proposal outlines that Stoke City Council will administer the back office arrangements. It is intended, however, that the existing staff, the administrative staff, will remain in their current locations with their existing employer, should they not wish to move to a central location at this point. This situation will remain until such time as staff retire or leave, which will then enable us to achieve a single physical office space. This should mean that there is a smooth transition to the new structure and hopefully minimise the loss of experienced staff and mean that we're not required to use 2P. It's intended that we use a Section 113 agreement to allow the joint service to operate under the Local Government Act of 1972. The business case proposes to keep the current arrangements for the location of inquests. These will continue to be held locally, so therefore both in Stafford and Stoke-on-Trent. It's also proposed that we enhance the local service with the use of additional local sites, libraries, for example, within the districts and boroughs to provide access to the coroner for the bereaved. In terms of the financial aspects, we've worked with finance colleagues to agree the finances and are outlined in the business case. It's been agreed that the proposed new service will not exceed funding over and above the current financial commitment of either authority. Therefore, the budget envelope for the joint service will not exceed approximately 2.1 million, and with Staffordshire County Council's commitment not exceeding 1.36 million, and Stoke's commitment would be not exceeding 768,000. In the paper, you will note that the overheads for Staffordshire are not included in the figures, as these will remain within our authority when the single back office service is managed as planned by Stoke City Council. Should it be decided that Staffordshire were the host authority, then that same principle would work with Stoke's overheads not forming part of the budget envelope. As you may be aware, the current financial arrangement for providing payment to Stoke City Council for the North Staff's coroner is based on population, and therefore we pay approximately 49% of the North Staff's coroner's costs currently. The current proportion of total costs equates to 64% being met by Staffordshire County Council and 36% by Stoke-on-Trent City Council. The business case advises that this proportion would be maintained in the new service and subject to periodic review and adjustment through that joint committee process if that is required. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. First person to raise a comment is Councillor Pert.
Morning, Chair. Morning, Committee. I just want to take up some of the points that were made by the Cabinet member, that efficiencies will come in the future, that there are back office savings, but we're not seeing any. because the efficiency savings will come in the future. There's a limited response from partners. Now, I think they're all linked. I think there's limited response from the partners because the business case lacks ambition. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against this in principle. I think it's a very good idea to have coterminous geographical boundaries across many of the public sector. I think that makes inordinate sense, and I accept that it takes time for those things to happen. But when someone promises me cake tomorrow, usually means we haven't done the hard work in taking that today. And I draw members' attention specifically to page 33, where we actually increase the back office template of staff, from what I can see, by not just one back office, but three, as far as I can work it out. And I actually think we should be taking the opportunity not just to look at the boundaries, we should take the opportunity to say, what is smarter working going to give us? Because if we don't do the work now, when will we see those savings? When will we see those efficiency savings come through? Because it probably won't come back in front of this committee for the rest of my lifetime, probably. Maybe they'll be seeing it through the coroner, who knows? That's the first point I want to make, which is jam tomorrow doesn't quite work for me, particularly in the place where we are, and we needed to work harder on this business case to make it lean and efficient. Second point I want to make is page 36. We talk about the majority of the work, the majority of the communication is with families, and is carried out by telephone, email, and by post. What I fundamentally don't understand is why we aren't looking at a different way of working, a more agile way of working. Surely one of the things we all learnt from the pandemic was we don't need to be tied to an office base. And that maybe is the bit which leverages some of the savings I'm talking about. But there is no mention, as far as I can work it out within this paper, about agile working, hybrid working, flexible and fleet of foot. And frankly, that's what the public sector does need to be. Thirdly, there is reference to governance of the coroner's work through the cabinet. No problem with that, but there's no reference of oversight and scrutiny. And I think that is a real big miss in this paper, because where is the role for oversight and scrutiny of these, or is that just left to the cabinet and the coroner to decide for themselves? And I think that's a big miss. And the final, just very minor point in terms of page 33, but I think it underlines some of the points I'm trying to make. When we talk about contracts, what I don't understand is why we don't offer people who want to go to a brand new contract. We don't have to make them redundant. If they don't want to move off their current contract, leave them on their current contract and wait for them to leave the service or retire, whatever it is. But we should have an aspiration of one common contract across one common service. And we should give employees, existing employees, the opportunity to move to that common contract. Because what that then allows us to do is for new employees, we start them on that contract. And that's probably many of the reasons why I think this lacks ambition. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, there's 3 points there. Do you want to take those in stages?
Thank you, and I'm shortly going to defer to my colleagues here who are the experts, but I think that the main driver of this was the fact that the current coroner in South Staffs has retired or is retiring, and this forms a pretty standard model of what normally happens. I do take the point that we could possibly maybe be a little bit more innovative in our approach. I absolutely accept that, but I will defer now to Janine for the first part and then possibly Trish. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I'll cover some of the points first and then hand over to Janine. And actually just starting with your last point, if I may, in terms of the staff contracts. And this may not be clear enough in the business case, and I'll take that on board, but it is the intention that the existing staff actually do join this single service, but it's just recognising that actually they may not want to change their terms and conditions, and therefore it's not going to be mandatory for them to do so. But if they want to, absolutely, that's part of it, because we really don't want to be in a position where we lose those existing experienced staff. It is a very small team. It's 2 FTEs, so clearly losing one loses 50% of our experienced staff. So that is the intention, and absolutely any new employees joining would be on that single office contract. So just sort of to clarify that. In terms of not needing an office space and hybrid working, yes, absolutely understand the point. When it comes to inquests, since the pandemic, we have operated inquests via Teams, so absolutely families do not have to attend if they don't wish to. They're able to join by Teams, but the coroner has to be physically in a public building. So that element of keeping a building where it's recognised that's where the inquest will be held will happen even if the coroner and his support staff are the only people attending personally. Yes, and in terms of efficiencies in the future, we haven't defined that within the business case itself. However, what the proposal is around those contractual arrangements. So, for example, in Staffordshire, we have a number of arrangements with local funeral directors to enable us to remove the bereaved from where they are. In the north, that runs differently, and we're looking at already in advance of this how the north may mirror the south, and we want to put some of these contracts together so that we get efficiencies. Now, obviously, that takes time because contracts have an existing lifespan, so it needs to be tied in with when those contracts actually terminate. But that is the kind of aspiration we've got around contractual arrangements with, with people like funeral directors, but that also applies to agreements that we've got with hospital trusts for carrying out postmortems. And, the overall plan in terms of bringing in more digital autopsy than we currently have, that is absolutely part of the planning process.
Do you want me to...
Councillor Pert, is there any follow-up to that?
I was going to say, do you want me to come in now on the point you made about scrutiny? Yeah. So in terms of that joint executive committee, as I said, that would be made up of representatives from both Staffordshire County Council's members and Stoke City Council members. Items would then come through to scrutiny in the same way as items do currently. So if there was an item that was progressing to that joint executive committee that required a key decision, it would be scrutinised through both Staffordshire County Council's scrutiny process and Stoke-on-Trent City Council scrutiny. It isn't explicit in here, and we probably need to ensure that that is the case.
Councillor Pert, do you want to come back?
Yes, please. Thank you for the last point, and I think it would be helpful to the paper if it was. Equally, I think what would be helpful to the paper and the business case is demonstrating where those efficiency savings will come from, because it allows scrutiny in a year's time or 2 years' time to be able to say, how have we done? And some of these aren't going to be aspirational. Some of them won't be deliverable because, what we aspire to do, might not actually happen in reality. But having no aspiration means we'll definitely achieve that in reality. And that's why it does need to be in the business case. And I think it also ensures that we can demonstrate to the taxpayer of Staffordshire that we're trying to drive value for money wherever we get engaged. Just in terms of the physical presence of the coroner, understand that. What I think I was talking about was the back office, and I don't think anyone really picked up the point about the structure now being much more back office heavy. On page 35 of the papers, 33, it's numbered, because it does seem to me to be more back office heavy than it was previously. We seem to have swapped a senior coroner for back office people, which seems like an illogical starting point. Okay,
if I may come back in on that then. So, in terms of the senior coroner leaving, so there is a senior coroner less. Looking at the work of the coroner, in the new structure, there is intention to have an area coroner. That in itself does bring us efficiencies and savings because an area coroner is not at the salary of a senior coroner, so there will be some savings there. In terms of the other posts that are in the structure, aspirationally, we are looking at changing the court arrangements. So on days of inquests, instead of having a coroner's officer who is a police employee tied up all day in court with inquests, actually we're looking at court support officers who are of a lesser salary but can do the administration that is required in the court. So we're looking at a change going forward to that role. Now, at the moment that's aspirational. There's work to do to achieve that. So it is, as it says, aspirational at the moment.
Sorry, I've obviously not made my point well enough. I do apologise. I guess if you looked at the numbers of the new structure is the old structure. 8 police versus 8 police. 1 office manager versus 1 office manager. 2 area coroners, 2 area coroners, 7 assistant. I mean, I can carry on all day. 7 versus 7. It's the addition of the 1 PA, FTE, and the addition of 2 court support officers. So you've actually ended up with 3 FTEs more. I accept they're paid less, but it's back office, and you know, we've not seen, you know, that sort of, you know, we've not seen it in terms of people. You've added in 3 bodies.
Yes, I understand that's the point that you're making. Yes, and it is aspirational. It is against the backdrop of we absolutely will not put any more funding into this, and it's making sure that as we go forward, day one, we have the same structure. Now, when those job roles are looked at, then actually we may then have some efficiencies where the numbers don't increase at all. But until we work through that as a joint structure, we're not at that position at this moment. Janine, did you want to comment?
I guess what we're looking to do is rebalance the workloads. So in terms of the fact that we are losing a senior coroner for the south of the county, and we will have the 1 coroner who takes on all of those responsibilities. It's how we rebalance that administrative workload so that he is effectively supported, because obviously he will be picking up a much larger workload going forward.
Are you okay with that, Councillor Pert?
Not really, because there's no real demonstration of the need as to why it's 3, not 5, not 500, or just 1. And I think, you know, that was probably what is significantly missing from the paper. I accept the point being made as a principle, absolutely accept that point, and don't get me wrong, I'm not against the principle of what is outlined. I just think that, that there is, it feels a bit of an easy one rather than actually doing the harder work, which actually says the reason it's 1 is for this reason, or the reason it's 3 is for this reason, and actually this is what we're going to do in terms of changing people's structural. Maybe it's a business case written for central government, which is relatively, you know, light touch. I don't know. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I think you've made the point. Councillor Wilson, you want to come back?
I think at the heart of this, we have to remember that the last thing that we want is any sort of disruption in the whole process, and we want it to be completely seamless, because at the end of the day we are dealing with people's loved ones and relatives, and I think probably the focus here was to make sure that everything transitioned with as little fuss as possible. I do accept that there is innovation there that can be had, and I think that we have reached that, but happy to sort of look at it outside of the meeting and see if there's anything else that we could have done as Councillor Pert has indicated.
Okay, I think that's a point registered. Councillor Peters next.
Thank you, Chair. We've listened very carefully, of course, and the word that keeps cropping up is aspirational. Aspirational, I've heard that many times this morning, and I think that means achieve success or desire success. Now, I understand, and I've heard it many times as a governor at UHDB, that the pandemic has enabled professionals in the current climate to take more opportunities associated with innovation. They want innovation because they want improved efficiency and they want to be able to consistently deliver. Now, I don't get a sense of a lot of innovation around the paper that's been presented to us today. And I'd ask you to take it away and have a look if there's more that can be done. And one of the other things that sparked me was, is there any alignment in this paper, or is it necessary, with the new NHS integrated care system? Should there be any contact or alignment with that? And question, has there been? Have you considered that aspect in terms of all the stakeholders and all the people that are involved in this piece of work? And I agree with Councillor Pert, the need to be able to measure success is vital, because how will we know in 6, 9, 12 months, whether or whenever it is embedded, that you are making progress? And the point that the Cabinet member made about the most important people in this process are the loved ones and relatives. And they want to feel comfortable that we know what we're doing. And I'd like to get assurance that, can I just say bluntly, that aspiration needs to be clearly at the front of this, because you're going to have to convince a lot of people that it's the right way ahead. And I'd ask you to bear that in mind throughout your deliberations. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, just before I hand back over to Janine, I don't disagree with what you're saying. I'm not sure how we would interconnect with the NHS on this. I don't know if Janine knows the answer to that, but you know, what I would say is this isn't really a subject where you consider innovation particularly. This is unfortunately one of the things that happens in people's lives. And I think the most important part of this is to make sure that everything happens very smoothly. But I will hand over to Janine now.
In terms of the question around the NHS as a consultee, as we described earlier, as soon as, if the business case goes forward to the Ministry of Justice, there will be a consultation process as part of that. They will then consult key bodies, key stakeholders across Staffordshire on their views. So that responsibility is sitting with the MOJ. Our responsibility is that light touch consultation, which we are in the process of picking up prior to it going forward to the MOJ. So again, we will be having some of those conversations as part of that process going forward. So that was picked up through informal cabinet as well by Councillor McMahon, who flagged with us the need to make those connections.
Any response, Councillor Peters?
Not at the moment, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Warman.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to understand the staffing arrangements a little bit better from what they are now to what they will be in day one. Now, I can see in the business case the day one staffing structure, which means there's 1 senior coroner, 2 area coroners, 7 assistant coroners. So the current case as it is today or previously, am I right in saying that it's 2 senior coroners now as such, that it would have been 1 area coroner and then there would be 4 assistant coroners? Is that correct? And we're going from 2 senior, 1 area, 4 assistant to 1 senior, 2 area and 7 assistant. Am I right, effectively?
Yeah, in terms of senior coroners, we had 2, we're going to have 1 because Mr. Hager's retired. In his place, there'd be an area coroner. There's existing area coroner in the north already, so that would make the 2. In terms of assistant coroners, and I appreciate it might not be clear in this paper, and we'll take it away and have a look, there is no change in the number of assistant coroners we currently have now and what we have on day one. Recently we've had a couple of long-standing assistant coroners retire, and we've done some recruitment ourselves here and in the north to replace those numbers so that it will be the same on day one.
Can I just follow up on that?
Yeah,
so
sure.
In terms of the senior coroner's responsibilities, presumably the senior coroner must sign off and sort of effectively manage the whole process. What effect will will it have if we have 2 area coroners and 1 senior coroner? Does that mean that there will be an issue with the amount of work that 1 senior coroner will have? Or do you think that that will be able to be spread out across the area coroners in a way which doesn't then have an effect on timeliness of inquests and so on? Because my point would be, and I appreciate what Victoria, you're saying, which is that the residents and the bereaved and the relatives do need to come first in this process.
Yeah, to reassure you, it's the latter point that absolutely won't be an impact on timeliness of inquests. The second area coroner will enable us to, as the title kind of suggests, they would take on responsibility for a whole area and manage that in the way that happens in the north at the moment with their area coroner. The area coroner will handle a particular area. Okay.
And if I just come in on that to say that the coroner that remains in the north of the county has been consulted and has worked with us on this business case and feels confident about that sort of that workload. And we've also looked at best practice elsewhere in the country so that we can be assured that we are not asking something that will cause delays or glitches in the system for those bereaved families.
Is that okay, Councillor Wong? Okay, we've had a lot of concentration on the view from the employee side of things, the staffing levels. I've got a question really relating to the, I think Councillor Peters referred to this, the sort of customer end, the effect for our bereaved families. So it's a bit of a double question. The first part of it is, I noticed the reference to touchdown locations. How have the logistics of that been worked out to make sure that we've got the right places that are made available? And the sort of things like disability access, how will that be controlled? Will those sort of things be available for a long period of time, or might it just be a phasing thing and then they might disappear? And the other half of the question, which really I think would help, is there such a thing as an SLA in terms of the speed of response of the coroner service? Because if we're moving from situation A to situation B, you've got to be able to detect what effect that's had on the user, on the bereaved family.
Okay, if I pick up your the first point that you made around touchdown locations and how they have been decided. At present, we haven't agreed where those touchdown locations will be. What has come through very clearly is the fact that people do really welcome and benefit from a localised presence in terms of being able to have that conversation with a coronial support officer at that point. So when we are putting together the detail of the service, one of our aspirations, and I'm using that word again, but one of the things that we are looking to do is to capitalise on the ways in which we've worked during the pandemic, so being more agile, thinking through what a local presence might look like, and then defining where they would be within the community. In terms of access, we've talked about our libraries as being ideal sites for some of those, and we would then tie those in to sort of part of that wider library offer. So that is our view around those touchdown centres.
Okay. And if I just pick up in terms of speed of response for the bereaved and contact with the families, etc. We do already have some indicators. We're required to report on those nationally in terms of how quickly we handle the process for deaths that require the attention of the coroner, and then when that moves on to the proportion that require inquests, etc. So we will have those. We have them now, and we'll continue to use those to ensure that the service levels are maintained.
Okay, I don't feel so confident with the aspects of the touchdown points not having been decided upon, because it would be very easy to say, well, it proved to be too difficult, so we're not going to do it. I'd rather we'd maybe looked at the prospect of particularly the south of the county being disadvantaged by this. Those touchdown points might have been identified and a bit more definite. And I think the other thing is, in terms of moving on to the consultation, there's been a fair bit of consultation there. I can see the number of consultees that have been contacted, but I'm wondering whether something like a patients group or people like Crew's Bereavement might actually have a different angle, because they are dealing with the issues.
Yeah, I accept both of those. I think that's a very helpful suggestion about contact in terms of extending our consultation to pick up some of those groups. And again, some of those groups meet in our local libraries, so it is possible for us to have those conversations in more of an informal way, really, that will probably ensure that we get a more rounded response. We can certainly look as well as part of the business case before submission to the MOJ around what would be the best locations in terms of those touchdown centres. I think it is a real wish of ours that we build up that local presence. So that is certainly something that we can look to do.
Okay, Councillor Peters.
Just building on that point, Chair, when the Cabinet member opened, or a colleague, I can't remember which, we talked about having received limited responses to date. Could you expand on what limited means? And do you think there's a need to exercise a sense of pace around the responses? Are you in contact with them, giving them perhaps a deadline or a timeline by which they must come back to us? Because we can't just leave this floating. I'm sure you're not. But I'd like to think we've got it boxed in some way. Could you expand on any of that, please?
Do you want me to pick it?
Yeah. So in terms of the responses, in terms of written responses, we've received written responses from the fire service. But in terms of verbal conversations, we've had several conversations with our police colleagues, particularly those who have responsibility for the coroner's officers, because coroner's officers are police staff, which has indeed been positive. They do see value themselves in a single service, because clearly at the moment they are providing coroner's officers for 2 different local authorities with different working practices. So there's an opportunity for them as part of this, although we've not built this into our business case, for them to look at their coroner's office offer, to make that more efficient with the single practices and be more resilient, covering the whole area. In terms of the consultation today, we can take on board following up on that consultation with the colleagues that haven't actually responded yet, to get their views fed in. And as Janine highlighted, the Ministry of Justice do a full consultation where they contact all of the key stakeholders and any other stakeholders that we feel that we want to add into that, to make sure that we get a full view.
Okay. Another question, really comment as much as anything. The Annex C, which is showing the risks on page 43 of the PDF, you've got a risk register there with all the risks described and the scores, but normally to do a risk management exercise, you come up with the scores of the risks and the mitigations against. There's no evidence of any mitigations there. So, for instance, you've seen the forecast of cost for the service being higher than current, but there's no mitigation discussed. Being able to agree the merger with Stoke, there's no mitigation there.
Just to say, we do have those mitigations. We have an expanded consideration on the risk register, so that we can provide those.
which providing for us, it's more, have they been considered? If you're saying they have, then
Yes, yes, I have.
okay. If there are no other comments, I'll take that as Councillor Wilson again.
Yeah, if I can just comment, I think the difficulty with this is that it's not just Staffordshire County Council that's managing this. We're having to work closely with Stoke-on-Trent. So I think once we've figured out, and obviously we've got the risks there on the graph, but we have to work collaboratively with Stoke-on-Trent to mitigate against those potential risks. So that's something that we can take forward. But yeah, if no one's got any other questions, I just wanted to really thank the officers for the incredible amount of work they've done on this. It's been quite time consuming and quite detailed, but I think they've done a very good job. Thank you.
Right, if there are no other comments, we'll move on to item 5, which is the strategic plan 22 to 26. Yeah, please. Just give you a few minutes.
I've come
Right.
with my friends.
Okay. You have got Kerry Dove is now on screen. So item 5 is the strategic plan 2022 to 2026, and it's starting at page 45 in our pack. Would you like to present it?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for casting your eye over the strategic plan. I think I just want to draw your attention to a couple of changes that you will have observed from this strategic plan compared to previous strategic plans. First of all, it's brief and concise. I know, because I've been a councillor for quite a long time, that not many people actually read the strategic plan. So my view was, if you keep it short and sharp and put plenty of pictures in it, then it's got a good chance of getting read. So that is a reason why it is significantly reduced from what it was. We've reviewed the evidence base and the performance over the past few years, and what we've focused on with this strategic plan is our future priorities. As I say, we've tried to avoid it being overly long, wanted it to be more succinct, and I also wanted to make sure that it removed most, if not all, local government speak. And I had another read of it this morning, and I think we've just about achieved it, but I'm sure that the Scrutiny Committee, with its keen eye and sometimes sharp tongue, will make sure that if there are any areas where I've missed that, then you will pick up on it. Just moving on to the successes, Mr. Chairman, I think just drawing your attention to 3 key areas, families and communities. You'll know that the children's system transformation has been implemented and is now live. That's going well. It was a relatively slow start due to COVID and other issues. Building resilient families and communities, I think, is a really great success story, and also the development of family hubs. In health and care, which was my portfolio for a number of years, the COVID-19 response by our teams was absolutely tremendous, and they continue to deliver. And there are people in this chamber who are part of the Local Outbreak Control Board who will know how hard people have been working, not just in health, and not just in care, but also across the health services, our voluntary sectors, and others. Community help points are another area where we're very pleased with the progress, and also the Staffordshire Warmer Homes initiative, where we've seen lots of homes getting insulation put in. Much to my frustration, watching the Insulate Britain people gluing themselves to various places up and down the country, when actually this is going on in the county of Staffordshire. We've seen it happening. We need to do it at greater pace. I concede that fact. That's something we would want to pick up on. Also, Dementia Centers of Excellence, which was a long-term ambition. We've not been able to deliver to the extent that we would have liked, but certainly we've got a couple in, one in Stafford and one in Burton. The economy is an area where we've continued to push hard. The Staffordshire Means Back to Business initiative has been excellent, and our economic growth programme has created, or been part of the creation of 10,000 jobs. I accept that Staffordshire County Council does not directly employ an additional 10,000 people. It is a facilitator, an enabler, but it doesn't actually employ people directly. It relies on the businesses and the creativity and initiative of Staffordshire residents and business people to do that. We've also been working with our district and borough colleagues to help develop 4,000 new homes. Infrastructure progress includes projects like the Lichfield Southern Bypass and the Stafford Western Access Route, which have opened recently, the I-54 Western Extension, amongst others. And then the final thing to point out in the economy infrastructure piece, which I'm very pleased about, is the 25% reduction in CO2 emissions that we've witnessed over the past few years, and we've got plans in place to bring that forward. I want now, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay, just to turn to the plan itself, which is this document here, which you will see in your pack. As I say, it's succinct. It sets out a very clear vision to be innovative, ambitious, sustainable, with everyone, where everyone has the opportunity to be prosperous, be healthy and happy. These are sort of, I suppose, aspirations that you'd expect any council anywhere in this country to have. But what we want to do is make sure that you can see Staffordshire flowing throughout this. The best thing that I can point you to, really, and the thing that's worked for us over the past few years is what's called the plan on a page. And if I just hold that up, that's the one that's got the vision at the top, outcomes, priorities, and how we work. And if I draw your attention to that, you can see with the priorities, as we go through those, for example, support Staffordshire's economy to grow, generating more and better paid jobs. Members of staff and our communities can see from that the activities that we've got going at the moment actually support the delivery of that priority. And it's important that we have initiatives sitting underneath that throughout our 4-year term, so that we can see that, so that we can deliver for the people of Staffordshire. So it's on us as councillors to make sure that we are taking things forward under each of those initiatives. So when we say tackle climate change, enhance our environment and make Staffordshire more sustainable, as the second priority, the question you would be asking yourself is, so what are you doing? Okay, then we can give you a series of initiatives. Encouraging good health and well-being, resilience and independence. It's things like that are very broad, actually. We work through Jeremy's committee, through the Health Scrutiny Committee, through the Integrated Care Board, and our partners in the NHS, and then also on the well-being side, the overwhelming majority of the outcomes that people have in well-being aren't tied to how good the health service is, it's how good your environment is. So working with districts and boroughs and creating a coherent group of the 9 districts, boroughs and the county across Staffordshire to work to improve well-being of our residents across the county. Fixing more roads is something that's I'm really keen on. I'm sick and tired of potholes, okay? Aren't we all? It's what dominates our inbox. We want to start the journey, if you excuse the sort of pun, I guess, of further investment and restructure of the highways department so that we get better at fixing our roads. It is the source of great frustration to many of our residents. I've got a resident who lives in East Staffs who probably writes to me, I think, 4 or 5 times a day with her potholes. A measure of success would be that person particularly no longer writing to me, Bernard. You know who I'm talking about. So it's getting those improvements in place, restructuring our teams so that they deliver better, and starting the journey. We can't do everything at a single sitting, but what we do need to do is to be able to demonstrate definite progress over this planned period. And if we're not making progress, or if you perceive us not to be making progress, hold us to account. Get me back in here and say, hey, you said that you'd do this. What is the progress that you're making? And that's what I'll have to come and do, Mr. Chairman. So then, moving on to the third column on the how we work, that speaks for itself. There's some more details within the plan on the how we work component, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Mr. Chairman, as I say, a succinct document, hopefully sufficiently high level that there's no howlers in there that members of your committee are going to point out, but there may well be. And I'm happy to take any questions, Mr. Chairman. I've got Kerry on screen who's there to support me, if not in body, certainly in spirit. And back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, first comment is Councillor Charles Atkins.
It's good to see that the leader has an imaginary friend on the screen. But I've got 3 points I'd like to make. First of all, we're facing an energy crisis in terms of bills, etc., particularly come April. So what is Staffordshire Warmer Homes programme doing to try to meet that crisis, and particularly to focus on those people who are going to be plunged into fuel poverty for the first time, and those families that will literally have to make a decision between heating and eating? That's the first one. The second one is on the Dementia Centers. The leader will know that this is an issue which I have focused on for many years. Councillor DeVille has just announced that the site, which was going to be the site for a dementia centre just outside Leek in the north of the county, is going to be sold. This is after it's been under guardianship for well over 10 years, after £1 million was spent on Nivden Hall. And of course, this was going to be the site for a dementia centre, but the commercial provider felt that they couldn't make a profit out of it, so they walked away. And this particular site could have been used, or has been used in some ways, for a community mental health project. But this is an area where buildings have been in guardianship for a very long time, and I don't feel that taxpayers have had value for money, as Councillor DeVille put in his press release, because having spent £1 million on upgrading Nivden Hall, seems to me that the community hasn't had value for money at all. And lastly, the leader talks about wanting to invest in homes. Well, we had a very optimistic presentation to the medium-term financial strategy working group about how this 3-year investment strategy of £105 million was going to solve all our customer-facing problems. We were going to have roads without potholes, we were going to have grids cleared out. But now, of course, because of the 1-year settlement, that programme has been massively cut back. So what parts of that presentation will now be scrapped? Thank you.
Over to you, Councillor White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your point about the rising price of fuel is a well-made point, and it's not one that Staffordshire County Council can answer. There is a series of decisions that are required by national government, particularly around the price cap, what's going to be done about VAT or not, whether or not there is some other form of taxation for the fuel companies as proposed by the Labour Party in Westminster, or some other solution. Okay, but it's not something that Staffordshire County Council can directly influence, and it would be incorrect of me to actually start to try and say, well, or even to suggest that the Staffordshire Warmer Homes Initiative can insulate homes to the extent that they require significantly less fuel to heat, ergo that people aren't going to go into fuel poverty. I can't make that because the deliverability of the Staffordshire Warm Home Scheme isn't at that pace, and I'm not sure, even with the best will in the world, however well we insulate a home, we're going to reduce the requirement to heat it to the extent that fuel bills will stay the same. That isn't going to happen. So I'm going to have to park that for central government, I'm afraid. The Dementia Centers of Excellence, as Charlotte knows, was a promise I inherited from a previous occupant of the health and care portfolio, which was something that was going to be a challenge to deliver. And I know that Councillor Atkins has lobbied hard for many years around Nivden Hall, but the relationship with the commercial provider meant that they made it clear to us at the time that they were unable to provide a commercial dementia centre of excellence in that area. So we are left where we are left, unfortunately. I can't speak to the value component of the, I think, is it the Spring Hill site you're describing, Councillor Atkins?
It's Spring Hill and Nivden Hall.
Yeah, I can't speak directly to the Spring Hill site at the moment, Mr. Chairman, because I don't have the details immediately to hand. I have seen the exchange of correspondence, but I can't speak to the details of it. As far as the highways issue is concerned, this plan is clear that what we want to do is set out on a direction of, or a trajectory of improvement. okay? Now, my ambition was to improve as fast as we possibly could. And that would require a certain amount of, I felt would require a certain amount of investment in the highways. As it happens, what we get is instead of what was anticipated to be a 3-year settlement, Mr. Chairman, from central government, we got a 1-year settlement. There's a pledge at the back of this document, which members may have seen, and I'll just read it. In fact, no, it's on the plan on a page. It's the pledge is on the plan on a page as well. But it's the first one is pledge number 1 is to reduce costs and live within our means. So whilst I would have dearly loved to be able to put more money into the highways, what's happened is central government's given us a 1-year settlement, and net result is we can only put an additional 15.5 million, I think it is, plus some additional revenue money into the highways, which is less than I would have liked. But it starts us on a journey to improvement. It gives us the opportunity to think about those areas of reform and restructure within the highways department that is required, and it gets us going. It doesn't get us all the way, it gets us going, and I hope that members will be able to bear with me and bear with government whilst they consider how local government is going to be funded. Undoubtedly, Councillor Williams will have given you a long exposition of his how upset he was that central government withdrew around £8.7 million of highways funding from us. Councillor Williams isn't the only one that's upset. I think there's probably around 880,000 people across Staffordshire who are rather upset about the withdrawal of 8.7 million quid of highways funding. But we are where we are, and we've got the settlement. We're able to put an additional 15.5-ish, I think it is off the top of my head, into highways, and I hope that you will start to see at least some improvement in the highways network, Mr. Chairman.
Just to come back quickly, I hope that the county has not given up on its aspiration to provide dementia services within the north of the county. We have an ageing population. We have increasing demand for dementia support, both to the families who are coping with someone who's been struck down with dementia, but also for the individuals in terms of long-term care. So I do hope that that will be something which will be looked at in the future, because there are just not enough services, and there are people who are in desperate need of support, and you come across them all the time, who just have not signposted in a direction to help their daily life. I mean, many of them are not looking for help, but many are ground down to a situation where they themselves become ill and unable to care. So I do think that there are a real need to boost that and to work with districts and boroughs to ensure that this, what would become an epidemic, I think, of dementia, is dealt with in a more timely way.
Did you want to respond?
Yeah, you're quite right. The challenge of an ageing population is something that all authorities have to confront. I was drawn to Councillor Pert's comments during the last item, which was focusing on an innovation, ways of doing things, and not using the old assumptions about the way we look after older people in the future. Johnny McMahon recommended a book to me by an author called Atul Gawande, who's an American clinician stroke geriatrician. It's called Being Mortal, and it's about how we live meaningful lives, lives of value, towards the end of our lives, and understand what frailty looks like, understand how we deal with frailty, what sort of accommodation people who are frail and starting to display signs of dementia should have, and how we can accommodate those people in that situation. And I think there's an awful lot of material available to us, which perhaps Jeremy and his committee might want to take a look at, which will point us in the direction of how we should configure our homes, configure our accommodation for older people, and how we make sure that people can have meaningful lives toward purpose at the end of life. Because one of the things that's quite frustrating is some of the assumptions that are made around nursing care are that the most important thing is to put people into a safe space. Actually, you're still a human being at the end of the day, and you still want purpose in life. You don't want to be wrapped in cotton wool. You want to live life with meaning, with access to relatives, access to things that you want to do rather than things that are laid on. For somebody who likes to sit at their computer emailing all day, the fact that there's no internet connection in the nursing home, but you can do a whisk drive on a Thursday afternoon, it's just not going to crack it, is it really? So I think there's plenty of opportunities around on the innovation front when it comes to care for elderly and people who are starting to display symptoms of dementia. I could waffle on about that all day long, Mr. Chairman, because I've just read the book.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Atkins? Councillor Pert.
Thank you, Chair. Before anyone accuses me of being angry and not had my breakfast ready this morning, I'm going to go in the opposite direction on this item than I did on the first item. I fundamentally love being a resident of Staffordshire. I liked the vision and aspirations and ambition of the last plan. And I like the fact that this plan doesn't deviate significantly from some of those areas. And I just wanted to put on record that actually I like the plan as it's written, because I think it shows what we can do and where we will be in 4, 8, 10, 12 years' time, because if we don't plot that future, we'll never get there. So I think the plan is very good. The only thing I would say is by trying to truncate it and keep it in a readable form, it does mean that there are words like we want to reduce, let me pick a few examples. We want to reduce cost to live within our, and we want to reduce the cost to live within our means. It'd be useful at some stage to have some metrics around that. You talk about improving education, you talk about improving skills. It'd be useful just to have, an action plan at some stage that backs up the corporate plan. And I'm sure that is absolutely within your line of sight in terms of providing those things so that we can measure that, so that our residents can measure that, and so that we know what success in metric terms looks like. We've gone from what to what. So my first point is I'm sure there's some action plans and other things around this, but I would just like a confirmation to that. Second point is I wonder whether there's some more meat on the bones with some of this. I take in the pledge, for example. We're going to help partner organisations to build more homes. Actually, my personal preference would be that they build more homes which are carbon neutral, energy efficient, manage to fit, EV charging, have, super fast broadband or ultra fast broadband. And I think it needs, I think within the next level of detail down, there needs to be a lot more in terms of, actually what is the future and what should it look like, and how do we build that in? And I take that from the homes point, but there's also something in terms of the role that the county council has within carbon neutral. And I remember seeing a stat recently which suggests that that public services, public sector is responsible for 2% of carbon production. So frankly, whilst it's really important that we reduce our carbon emissions by 25%, and that's great that we've done that, and that we will get to carbon neutral by 2050, what I think is probably as important is our role as an ambassador to persuade everyone else, the other 98%, to come on board and take every opportunity they have. And I think those are two good examples of one of the things I think that could be more strengthened within the plan, which is, we have a role for doing a few things ourselves, but actually our big role is to influence lots of other people to do lots of things, like a Swiss watch. If one part of the Swiss watch doesn't work, then the whole thing doesn't work. And I think that, the real opportunity is how do we engage on a common plan with all partners and with common expectations, because we've demonstrated in the last pandemic, in this pandemic, that if we all work together, we will make some phenomenal changes to people's lives and the way of life for all of our residents. And to me, the bit which probably needs greater emphasis is that partnership piece. I'll rest. Thank you.
Councillor White.
You're quite right. There's nothing in this plan. There's almost nothing in this plan we can do on our own. Nearly everything requires partners. We can list off the partners, which is the Local Enterprise Partnership for Economy and Skills, the Integrated Care Board, which is just taking off with health and care, and then finally the newly created or about to be approved Leaders Board of the 9 authorities that comprise Staffordshire. Each of those will take a slice of helping us to deliver on what our priorities are. So, for example, the Leaders Board, the benefit of the Leaders Board, and it helps by the fact that many of us in this chamber are double hatters. We understand how the districts and boroughs work as well as the County Council. Through the Leaders Board, we can encourage each other to support the trajectory towards zero carbon homes, for example, because the County Council doesn't determine what the local plans look like, or the supplementary planning documents that sit alongside the local plans. It is the districts and boroughs. But if we're all talking about the same thing, which is how do we achieve carbon neutrality at that Leaders Board, to illustrate one particular example, then we can start to drive that forward. To your point about targets and you know, how do we know we get there? You're quite right, we will be having service plans for each of the directorates, so we say, well, this is our objective for this year, this is what we're intending to deliver, and they will come forward in due course. I suppose, Mr. Chairman, just to illustrate a point I'm a huge fan of scrutiny, always have been. I sat where you sat 12 years ago as Chairman of Corporate Review at the time, and we played a really important role in helping the authority come up with some of its ideas and plans for delivery of our objectives. So I know I've got the benefit of having the chairs of the respective scrutiny committees in this room at the moment, but one thing I would ask you to do is just take a look at the priorities and how we work as scrutiny committees, and ask yourselves, so what, and how, and how can the committee itself add value to these the delivery of these priorities. So, for example, through Prosperous, one of the priorities, support Staffordshire's economy to grow, generate more and better paid jobs. You'd be asking Philip White, so what are you doing? And then, so what? How else can we add value? What else can my committee do? And thinking forward to actually help you do that. Same with climate change. We've got some plans in place with climate change, and Connor, I know you're the overview Vice Chairman of this committee. What else is it that perhaps the executive haven't thought about that we need to be thinking about in order to deliver on that priority? Because once this plan is adopted, Mr. Chairman, it's not my plan, it's the authority's plan, and we all own a slice of it, and we've all got an interest in making sure we deliver part of it. And to Jeremy, with encouraging good health and well-being, resilience and independence, a very broad sentence, but actually, have we thought about what areas could we think about that we haven't already thought about? So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I close.
Okay, any come back from that? No? Councillor Clements?
Thank you, Chair. I too like this plan. It was easy to read through, it was easy to understand, and it was easy to get to the end of it. And just on your last point, Councillor White was at Prosperous last week answering just that very question that you've just posed to me, sorry. I don't want to marry Alan White, sorry. I think the successes in this plan speak for themselves. The work that we've done with carbon emissions, the work we've done to facilitate businesses to come here with everything that's been listed in there, I-54 and the Staffordshire, whatever it's called, the new Staffordshire route, the work that we've done with families, and us as county councillors, the work that we've done with helping our residents and the people that we represent help themselves more with the funding plans that we've had. And it's now getting to the stage where we can't fund everybody because everybody's realised how much we can help them, and then they all want a slice of that. I too am looking forward to a better road system, and at my committee last week I urged every member to lobby their MPs because £8.6 million is a lot of money to lose from our highways budget. All I'd say on that is try driving an EV vehicle that doesn't have the suspension of a normal car over potholes and crumbling roads. Good job I haven't got any fillings right now because some of them are really, really bad. I was too going to ask, how are we lobbying with central government as an authority, and I know that you are doing that. And Councillor Atkins, it's like you read my notes this morning on dementia and memory cafes. As a dementia champion for Tamworth for the last 6 years, we have done a hell of a lot of work to become a dementia-friendly community, as I know Lichfield have. We're actually trying to set up another memory cafe now, in addition to the one that we've got, for carers and their loved ones. And by making places more dementia-friendly and welcoming, we actually help our ageing population. And that's been proven by the Alzheimer's Society, who came to a meeting with us yesterday. By making things easier for people to understand and more welcoming, that actually helps our ageing population, which we're all on that path at some stage. So thank you, Leader, for the plan. Thank you to the team that have put it together. And I think, as I've said at the start, our successes speak for themselves.
Councillor White, do you want to respond?
On the lobbying of central government, we've through the Local Government Association, the County Council Network, and others, we continue to lobby government. One particular initiative at the moment is the Fair Funding Group. There's a group of 20 councils across England who, they're a mix of Mets, unitaries and shire counties who get proportionally less than other authorities, and Stafford gets very significantly less than other authorities, and it's only through our innovation over the past several years that we've been able to live within our means. But we continue to try and get our fair shout at it. The Secretary of State, Michael Gove, has announced the Fair Funding Review. You've been a councillor for decades, Mr. Chairman. You've probably lost count of the number of fair funding reviews we've been promised over the years. So can I suggest that nobody holds their breath? But we continue to lobby, and we'll see how we get on.
Is that okay? Councillor Clements? Councillor Peters?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Mr. White. This is indeed a really good report. It focuses the mind, but I'm going to extract the part from it that you alluded to when you opened with us today. The complainants in Burton-on-Trent are ones that are particularly frustrated by everything that's going on, but they do replicate a lot of people that elected members deal with on a day-to-day basis at various level below that. And what's missing from all of this conversation today, an aspirational plan. Here we have a 4-year plan. But Joe Public, my constituents, do not see a sense of pace in terms of addressing highway issues. They hear me talk at parish council meetings. Here we go again. Yes, put it in, we'll prioritise it, we'll come out and have a look at it. And then there's an inordinate amount of time waiting for that piece of work to be completed. And it becomes a real frustration having to defend it when on paper to the public it looks like a straightforward piece of work to a professional organisation. So I think there's something around improving our communication strategy and standing by what we're saying and spreading it out over a 4-year period isn't helpful to the public trying to understand what we're on with. And one of the particular issues, just moving on to another point now, in East Staffordshire, I'm convinced that it's the hub and storage depot for every HGV in the UK. It's an incredible amount of HGVs in and out of Burton. And when I've got a bad day, I go to certain traffic islands and stand and watch these vehicles go round, and you can see the grooves being gouged out of the road. Now, why is that? We're not skimping on road surfaces, are we? Or is it overloaded vehicles that are just churning up the surfaces? So there's something about HGVs, and I'm going to write to our MP, because I've been trying to drum up a case in my own mind here. Why don't HGV owners or business owners contribute to road fund licenses or something that will help maintain the road services? That's what I put in the context, and the way you framed it earlier, Leader, is innovation. Can the County Council make any representations to government about HGVs paying a contribution to the upkeep of the road services and the highways? Thank you.
Councillor White?
You're quite right. People want to see their roads fixed now. and they want to be communicated with when they make a report. We all live in a generation where we're all the Amazon generation, aren't we? If you want it, if you see it, you want it, you buy it, you get told by Amazon when it's due to arrive, you're told to the nearest minute when it's due to arrive. And yet, with many council services, you report it, you don't hear back for ages, you don't know what's going on, and therefore what we need to do is make sure that our communications reflect the expectations of the people that we represent. We were promised when we first put in this, and I think you were a councillor at the time, Bernard, when we did this reconfiguration with Amy, we were promised that we would get good communication, messages through text. I think, Connor, you were a councillor at the time as well. That didn't come to fruition in the way we anticipated, so we need to do something about that and improve that communication. Some of the issues around why things take as long as they do is because potholes that were repaired that you'd expect to be right first time aren't right first time, so they have to go back and get redone in a period of time which is unacceptable. If we get these things done right first time, then they don't need to go back. Somebody who's going back to fix a pothole can't fix the next pothole, which adds to the frustration that people have. And David Williams is onto that, and I hope through Tina's committee, Mr. Chairman, that she keeps him honest. That's a good phrase, isn't it? And make sure that he delivers in the way that he anticipates. As far as your point about road fund contributions are, I know that HGV owners do pay a lot of money for their licenses to operate. Some of that money is redistributed through our highways allocations, as you know. Our highways allocations just been cut. So I'll have to, Bernard, thank you for your offer to lobby your local MP. That will all add into the mix. If I could ask all members in the chamber just to make sure they're lobbying their MPs to make sure they know the effect of reducing the amount of money that's going to the highways. But the mechanism's there, it's just they've taken some from us. Mr. Chairman.
Is that okay? Councillor Wyman.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want firstly to praise this plan because there is no council speak, 100%. It is clear, it's concise, and it does have sustainability at its heart. So I want to thank you, Alan, and the Cabinet for producing it. There is one conflict, though, that I see within it, which is between pledging value for money versus sustainability. And I'll give you one example. So if we're looking at a property transaction, and there may be a piece of land that we are selling, what do we do? Do we go for the best value, so we get the most money out of it, or do we look at other sustainable options for that piece of land? That to me is a conflict within the plan, and I wonder whether we should be putting value for money as a very important part of it, but not at the expense of sustainability. So that's a question for you, Alan, I suppose, and I'll let you go into that one first.
Councillor White.
Yeah, that's a stinker. I get your point. I'm going to have to take that away, Connor, because you raise a really important issue. We are required to get best consideration for a site, but best consideration in financial terms isn't necessarily best consideration in sustainable terms. And we may well have to have a rethink about what best consideration actually means. If we have to sell a piece of land for a factory that's to somebody who's going to put a factory on it that's churning out millions of tons of CO2, just that simple example I've just given you there illustrates why you're actually bang on with your question. Can't answer it, I'm afraid, but I'll take it away and see if we can do some thinking about how we approach that conundrum.
Councillor Wyman, is that okay?
Yeah, thank you very much, Alan. I appreciate that. And just finally, might be one you need to take away as well. It's around the plan talks about collaboration with communities, partners, and businesses working together to improve our county. The line says collaboration is at the core of everything we do in the county council. Would you work with me and others to try and make that a reality in this council over the next few years? There have been obviously concerns within Burton around collaboration and working together with the local community and delivering what their ambitions are. So I think, again, only Audit and Standards Committee were looking at the Constitution and the way that we invite citizens and residents to become involved within the council. and participate in the democracy of this council. And I wonder whether your input as leader would be good in that constitution to see whether we can put something around collaboration within it. We talk about petitions and we talk about inviting them to come and speak at committees. This is residents. But do we have anything in there that says that they should be at the heart of our decision-making processes at the start rather than kind of halfway? We seem to have a plan for something and then consult upon it, and then we talk to residents. Perhaps it's best if we collaborate first, right at the outset when we're making those decisions on the ideas we want to take forward. Is that okay? Thank you.
Yep, and I understand what you're saying. So get people in at the start and say, what would you like to do? And then go from there. So there's a couple of things I'd like to say by way of response to that. First of all, it is always easier to criticise than to create. So we can come up with some ideas about what we'd like to do, and people will just pick them apart. Doesn't matter which political party you're from. If you're going to stand up and be counted and say, we could do this, somebody's always going to say, well, I don't like that. And then you say to them, well, what would you do? I don't know, but I definitely wouldn't do that. So the thing is, it is incumbent upon us as community leaders and leaders of Staffordshire to actually come up with ideas. If people externally come up with ideas as well, then let's get them in and let's give them some consideration, because to put the boot on the other foot, for us to be the ones that's criticising rather than creating, or collaborating rather than criticising, should I rephrase that, that would be fantastic. I do know from experience of a couple of years as a portfolio holder for development at Lichfield District Council, where I helped to take the parts of the local plan, is that you do get people who are single issue people, who they're going to focus on Acacia Avenue and that's it, and they're not going to think more broadly. That does present its own challenges. In Lichfield, the Beacon Street Area Residents Association, which Colin will know extremely well, have a particular view of one street in Lichfield, and then they'll make comments on other things, but that's what they're focused on. So we do have to be slightly, I suppose, careful about how much credence we give to particular groups who are just focused on the single issues. And then my final point on this is that everybody in this chamber is a citizen of Staffordshire. You were just a bloke walking down the street until you decided to put your name forward for election, Connor. And now here you are, a citizen of Staffordshire representing 11,000 people. So I understand that we do want to get people involved with our day-to-day decision-making if we can, but you're doing it on behalf of a lot of people. I would hope that you're sufficiently in touch with I know you are sufficiently in touch because of the call-in illustrated how in touch you are with your residents, that you're able to represent their views fairly. And if you're not representing their views fairly, then come the next election, they'll certainly let you know.
Okay. Councillor Kath Perry.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for this. It's absolutely excellent, I think. Easy to understand. I just want to make a couple of observations, and I'm not sure whether there's a question in there, but I just want to say a few words, if I may. I'm sure we all strive for the outcomes of this report, and the priorities are essential to achieve the outcomes. I look at this as the priorities as being a tree, and underneath those priorities there's lots of branches on that tree. Twigs, leaves to grow. The leaves to grow are how we work, because if people see the leaves growing, that's the communities. If we get the priorities right, the communities will then hopefully help themselves more. But it's when they see things like potholes that don't get done, and flooding is another issue. So I'm hoping they interact with each other, the priorities, because you've got climate change and you've got the highways. Yes, we focus on the pothole, but it's not just the pothole, it's the drainage systems underneath, which involves the house builds that we have, or forthcoming that we're about to have, which impacts on flooding, which is getting worse, which affects climate change. So they all interact with each other. And if we get some of these priorities right, we have done in the past, and we're striving to do that with our outcomes, but we need to get the people along with us. We need to fulfil those priorities. And as I've said, I think there's lots of them mingle to each other. As you rightly focused on, we're not having the money as we want for the highways issues, the potholes, etc. But I think we need to, it's what people see. And if people don't see things that are done right, like you've just said, having to go back and do a pothole again, or the drainage systems, they look at them, they think they've done them, but they haven't actually, because they've just sort of prodded the top and left it and they have to come back. It's all this, so we need to get all those things right underneath. And so long as we do that, the outcomes will speak for themselves at the end of the day. So as I said, I'm not sure there's a question in there, and if I've rambled on, I'm sorry, but I just felt I needed to have an input on what the priorities and the how we work for the outcomes at the end of it, Chairman. Thank you.
Did you detect a question there, Councillor White?
I did actually, because I think the point you're making seems to me that if we're expecting communities to help themselves, then the communities have a reasonable expectation that we would be helping them on the assets that we're responsible for. And I think that's the point I've deduced from what you're saying, and you're quite right. And so you talked about the flooding issue. The flooding has a major role on the longevity of the highways. You get flooded, the hydrostatic pressure of the tyres going as you drive over them means that you get potholes quicker. So if we can solve the flooding, then we can make our roads last longer, which means we have to fill in less potholes, which means that Bernard gets his complainant off his back. But when we're in the process of working on the flood strategy, the question we need to ask ourselves with the flood strategy, and the Scrutiny Committee with Tina can be doing this, is so what? You know, it's all fine and dandy to get some words on paper, but we've got to get and do something about it. We've got to demonstrate evidence, and Jeremy is a stickler for having evidence that stuff's getting done, and has illustrated that point on a couple of occasions this morning. But we need to be able to demonstrate that we're actually doing something about the problems that we've identified through the flooding strategy. And so I would ask the Scrutiny Committees to make sure that we're onto that and hold us to account for it. There is no point for us sending an operative down with as Derek Hupfield would put it, with a tin shovel full of coal tar and a tin bucket full of coal tar and a shovel to whack it into a hole that's only going to last for a few weeks. Pointless. Anybody can do that, but it's got to last. So yeah, I do take your point, and it's incumbent on us, if we're going to ask our communities to do stuff, for us to reciprocate.
Okay, well, Kerry Dove's not had a chance to speak yet, and I think there might be an opportunity cropping up now, because I've listened to some of the comments, and I've got a pet subject that I'm going to raise. But listening to some of the other speakers, Councillor Peters touched on my thorny subject very close by when he said it's an aspirational plan, but there's no evidence of pace. And he was talking about highways. Councillor Pert's talked about communications, and now Councillor Perry has just talked about how we demonstrate progress. My issue is always with the strategic plan is that it's all very well having 5 priorities, you know, growing business, fixing more roads, health and well-being, climate change, children and young persons and the potential. That would be the same for every single county. Every single one of the counties in this country would want to do those 5 aspirations. We gave scrutiny to the climate change report, and I think the same things were said there. Well, I certainly said it. It's all very well saying pick a year, and let's say by 2050 we're going to do magic things, but what are we doing tomorrow? And that's the thing that I particularly see missing in the strategic plan. I know you've said it's high level, but I'm going to mention Kerry again, because we've discussed as a group that what we'd like to see is some form of dashboard, something that would be of assistance to the organisation as a whole, but particularly of use to us as a corporate review body, to be able to see what's happening. Because it's all very well saying we're going to improve potholes, but if there were 10,000 fixed last year and we fixed 10,001 this year, is that an improvement? You know, and what's the pace to quote the word from Councillor Peters. There's no evidence of pace here, and I appreciate there's probably other things like KPIs, but I would like to see some demonstration of what the priorities mean in terms of how we're going to see that demonstrated. Kerry knows well that we've asked for a view of a dashboard, which I think would be useful, so we see how many people are in care, we see how many potholes there are outstanding, category 3 calls outstanding.
So, Kerry, my virtual friend, it's over to you. And quarterly reports, joint strategic needs assessment, Power BI and other things perhaps maybe worth referring to?
Thank you, Councillor White, and thank you, Chairman. And just to reassure the committee, work is already starting to develop the corporate delivery plan for 2022-23, which will look to translate this new strategic plan into some clear deliverables for the next 12 months, of which as part of that we will be working with officers and portfolio holders to discuss targets and key metrics that will enable us to kind of be able to track progress. And obviously that will then form the basis of the quarterly reports on our performance that comes through to Cabinet and obviously also to Scrutiny as well. As Chairman has outlined, we've obviously had discussions previously on establishing a clearer set of KPIs, core KPIs across the organisation. We have been working on that behind the scenes since conversations with this committee, and we're working on the Q3 report currently, which will start to bring those KPIs to life for you, and we will start to be reporting on that data from Q3, and we look forward to the committee's comments and feedback on that as a starting point in terms of this development. As well as the corporate delivery plan, other work that we are going to be doing is to make sure we're mapping out those associated key strategies as well as the corporate delivery plan that contribute to the delivery of the strategic plan. We've already mentioned this morning the climate change strategy and action plan, which are key to that. So making sure we've got a clear oversight of what are those key associated strategies and making sure we've got that clear line of sight from them to the ambitions that we are putting as part of this strategic plan, and therefore some clear deliverables that the organisation is working towards. And I say that will all be a key part of the integrated performance report moving forward, and we're looking forward to working with the committee more closely in terms of developing those KPIs. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that response. Are there any other comments or questions anybody would like to raise on the strategic plan? No? Okay. Well, thanks to Kerry for your contribution now, and Councillor White for yours, endeavouring to answer everybody's questions. Much obliged. Thank you. You're welcome to, but it's our report internally at this stage. So we're on to item 6, which is the MTFS report. And just to give you the background on that, starting on page 71 of our pack, it's here particularly because the MTFS group is a subgroup of corporate review. So we're at the stage that the MTFS group has seen a draft of the report. It's now available for those people who are not on the MTFS to have a comment and see if there's any need for adjustment or any changes that you think are needing to put in or take out for that matter. The next stage in the process is the Cabinet meeting will receive whatever we determine is to be passed on to them as from today. So Mandy's got a tough job that today she's going to have to take any changes that we do suggest so that we get them to the Cabinet in time for the 26th of January. You'll see that it then goes to full council on the 10th of February. So as Councillor White has just said, it ceases to be the group's view or the view of the Overview Scrutiny Committee. It becomes then the adopted full council recommendation. What we've done is looked at 4 key areas this time, and we looked at those key areas particularly because they are the highest cost spending areas, and that is adult social care, the children's system, and particularly the transformation we identified as being a particular opportunity for cost saving, the liabilities on highway maintenance and how that can be improved, and lastly, digital capability, and we particularly again wanted to look at the digital innovations aspect of providing that capability. So what we've attempted to do then is to look both internally and ask Cabinet members where appropriate, but something I've been very keen on doing with the MTFS group is using the opportunity we have to bring in experts, if you like, from outside. So we have consulted with a number of other authorities for their view of how they go about looking at the same issues, how they look at cost control, how they look at potential monitoring mechanisms to see whether they've got a means of improving their modus operandi, and any contributions they've got in terms of best practice that they've found to be working. And we've done that with Children's Services. We've got guidance, for instance, to look for things like early prevention. And in terms of highways, we've looked at things like the reassurance and encouragement of their eyes and ears out in the field, looking for things such as some form of quality assurance and measurement. You'll also see that in the document, as well as the sections that we've had with each of those 4 subject areas, we've got a series of recommendations which will go through to the Cabinet meeting, and that's recommendations 1 to 20, which takes the recommendations by section. And I think the recommendations by section is quite useful. You can see on a sort of A to D or A to E breakdown what those recommendations are against each subject head. So each of the Cabinet members will see the recommendations that we've made particular to their area of responsibility. And I've realised I've probably said particular far too many times, so at that point I better stop and see if there's any comments or questions that anybody wants to make either from the group or outside the MTFS group. No? Everybody happy with what we've got there? Okay. Well, in that case, that will be the draft report which will be put through to the Cabinet meeting. I'll be attending the meeting, and that's why I didn't suggest that Councillor White sit here for that. And if you're happy with that will be the series of recommendations that we've made. And obviously, we'll start again next year on another MTFS. But Councillor Atkins.
Yeah, can I just make a comment? I always think that the medium-term financial strategy working group is a very effective way of looking at, particular budget areas. And I think this year in particular, our interviews with other councils were very instructive. I thought it was unfortunate that some people tried to discourage us from meeting them with those particular authorities. But I think, as it turned out, all the authorities that we spoke to really did have lessons for us to learn. It doesn't always happen that way. I've been on the working party on for many years. It doesn't always happen that way, but I think this year in particular, we did have a lot of really good input from other authorities, and I think it just demonstrates how much we can learn from other similar authorities, and how we must never be complacent about how we do things in Staffordshire.
Yeah, I quite agree. I think we've learnt quite a lot from seeing other authorities, and that's been very useful. It's obviously making the most of the situation that we've had with so many meetings having to be hybrid or online, and the fact that we've got people on the end of a computer line makes it a lot easier for them to attend meetings, and I think they've been quite positive about attending as well. They've probably been curious about how Staffordshire operates things, and there has been a meeting of minds and sharing of best practice. Councillor Pert, did you want to speak?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I would echo what Councillor Atkins has just said. I thought it was a very effective process this year. There are a lot of meetings in a very concentrated period of time. You know, there isn't more than a week or two that goes by without another set of meetings and then, you know, comparing and contrasting with other people. And obviously, there are some differences between ourselves and some of those other areas, and actually making those assessments and assimilations is really useful in terms of digging below the surface. So, you know, I do think that the discussions go further and we push the cabinet members and some of the officers further to look at other ways of working and other ways of doing things. It gives ultimately, and I get more and more letters from residents about council tax increases as the years go by. But it does give some assurance to our residents that, you know, their money is well spent within Staffordshire. And I think that's really important. And I would thank everyone who is on those committees for, you know, the openness that they bring to those committees, and to the chairs for the way that the whole of that committee works. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for those comments. Obviously, we're a long way away from setting off the next MTFS, which will be in the autumn, but hopefully those people who've been part of it have enjoyed it sufficiently to want to do something similar when we do get to that stage. And in terms of keeping it fresh, we've picked these 4 subjects or key areas. I think we need to be keeping it fresh for next year and maybe give some thought to how we might go about doing that in advance of the time when we need to decide that. Councillor Peters.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think the forums that we sat on, I didn't sit on them all, but I know that they added value. And I just wondered whether you would, when you make the presentation to Cabinet, you could feed back to us the mood, the mindset of, and how the information was received. Because what I'd like to be able to do next year when we reconvene is I'd be able to identify how successful we've been. Have we been successful? Did we add any value? Because as far as we're concerned, the meeting today, we think we did. And I would support that view. But in reality, what was the real impact? So I've perhaps not explained that very well, but if you could put something together around that, Chair, I think we could all feel a bit more reassured.
Yeah, I understand the question. I mean, Cabinet will always say that they welcome scrutiny, but it's how we demonstrate that we've, if you like, captured a thought that's worth passing on that needs some consideration. And it's down to us to be able to convey that as we've gone through those various interviews. I know Tracy's been along with us as well in terms of looking at the sort of number side of it, but it's the concept side, I think, which we've been able to understand. And it's up to us to try and communicate there is another way of looking, and we need to demonstrate to the appropriate cabinet member so they do get the chance. But yes, I'll take that point on that we would like some feedback from cabinet members if they've found the report to be useful this time around. Okay. If there's no other comments, we'll move on to the last item, which is the work plan. Work plan has been circulated. Are there any comments on that? Councillor Pert.
Thank you, Chair. I think the only comment I would have is there are a couple of pending elements for discussion. Maybe we could diarise those at some stage and move them out of pending.
Any other comments? Right. Okay. If there's nothing to add, we'll conclude the meeting. 11:40. Thanks for your attendance.